Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to speak on the Emergency Management Legislation Amendment Bill of 2018. Now this was born out of the white paper that was initiated by the Liberal government in after the 2012 Black Saturday events, which led to the reform being discussed and the Royal Commission recommendations. So quite proudly, we think this is a good action. We won't be opposing this, but there are some concerns that we may address. So this bill is about making sure there is good coordination right across the state of Victoria at state level, regional level and municipality level. It will be a staged approach to its implementation so that the state can get at a high level the operational elements required so that it can unfold at a regional and municipality level without any hiccups, so that the regional level people and the municipality level people can follow the guidelines at a state level, so it's very smooth transition. So what we will see is an improvement in the interoperability that needs to be streamlined. So we will have more coordination capacity between organisations that respond to emergency services and events, emergency events, such as the MFB, CFA, Lifesavers, Coast Guard, industry even will be playing a part in this, as they should be. The Bureau of Meteorology, departments, councils, CWA, and even vets, as we know, in some events such as fire and flood, there needs to be vet attendance for some animals to be put down, unfortunately. So what we will see is work being done in the area of mitigation, planning, mitigation and response, and recovery for events such as the fires, floods and many other events. So I'm really pleased to see this, because what we really want to see is those regional responses coordinated well. And I think we need to stop for a minute here and say we're doing a very good job already, but we can always improve. A continuous improvement cycle is something we should always embrace. But I want to take the time to thank people who operate in the emergency services space, and every single one of them is a person who plays an important part. And we talk about the people who come and give their time, both paid and volunteers. In Warrnambool, when I first took on this role, I met a lot of people who, you know, in typical local Western Victorian style, are very embracing and welcoming. And I remember being at a Bunnings sausage sizzle with the CFA, and both the paid and volunteer guys and girls together raising money. And I remember talking to them about the EBA actually on that day, and most of them didn't understand what it was really intricately about. They understood there was a pay rise and were quite comfortable with that and happy about that, as I would expect and as I think is, you know, quite acceptable. But when I talked to them about veto and the like, they were not aware and not comfortable with that. Now, a lot has come about since then, and it's just making it really difficult for integrated stations like Warrnambool to have the relationship that we all value in the country of respect between paid and volunteer workers. So I commend the guys at Warrnambool and at Portland, another integrated station, who do such a good job. They get on, get the work done, all of them, and I congratulate them and thank them. I also thank the CWA, the other lifesavers that I met this year on the beach. I went up and spoke to a few of the young guys who volunteer their time, the Coast Guard, who I met recently in Portland, and Warrnambool and Port Fairy, who do a fantastic job. It will always be best to have improvement. I experienced some of the coordination issues myself when I was nursing at the Framlingham Aboriginal community. The town of Framlingham is quite near the Aboriginal community, so I always had a challenge when I called ambulances, because no one could figure out the difference between Framlingham Aboriginal community and the Framlingham township. So it was a real challenge. And so it's things like that that we will see locals, if they're allowed a seat at the table, and this is where my concern is, when they're in the volunteer capacity, that is, because at the bill briefing that I went to on this bill, it was not identified that volunteers like CFA volunteers would actually be having a seat at the table that was silent on that, whereas the previous legislation actually specified that. So that's a real concern for me. And my example of the Framlingham example, or the local farmer, as I've rung up many a time for a fire and had to direct through different paddocks because I know where the drains are that have culverts in them versus, you know, a fire truck trying to get it through a drain fully loaded with water can cause it to actually get stuck. And so having that local knowledge is incredibly important, and mapping that out and having that planned for is really vital, and that's what this bill will see. We recently had an event in Warrnambool where a drowning actually occurred tragically, and the ambulance was called to the cutting. Unfortunately, I'm told the ambulance went to Killarney Beach, some 8 kilometres away. So it's this sort of local knowledge when we understand at local level, and often it is volunteers who, such as the Lifesaving Community, who know the coast well, or the CFA, who are often volunteer farmers out in the country who really do know the topography and the geography very well. So I'm pleased that we get the opportunity to really streamline that, because we've got some great opportunities, and you know, in Port Fairy is a very good example of how we've got a fire station that is in desperate need of being replaced. We have the situation where the SES, another fantastic group of mostly volunteers, work closely together with the CFA in Port Fairy, and so much so they want to coexist because it makes complete sense. Many of them wear the same hat. Currently in that fire station, the women, and on International Women's Day, where we see the token gesture behaviour of the other side who say they really embrace women, but the reality is if we're not going to, if you're happy to sign off on an EBA that says that women working part-time don't have the same skill capability, I'm personally offended. Because I worked part-time in both accident, emergency and intensive care, and you know that was you often 0.5, so 2 days one week, 3 days the next, and I'm quite offended by the fact that someone would say my skill set was any less than someone working full-time. I would disagree with that, and most women do manage to work very effectively part-time, maintain their skill set, which is a requirement of your registration, I might add, and do effective work within the home, running a family as well. So on International Women's Day, I'm quite offended that I stand here and I hear from the other side that they endorse an EBA that does not allow part-time work for within the fire services. And, you know, I think Myra from Port Fairy would also be quite offended, where she goes and volunteers at the Port Fairy station, and there is actually not even anywhere for her and her other female colleagues, which are growing in number, to change. So she actually changes beside the truck, and the men try to give her as much and her colleagues privacy as possible. But at the end of the day, you're in a rush, you're trying to get out the door, you're trying to get changed, so compromises, I'm sure, she would be in compromising positions often, and they're trying to do their best in that most disrespectful situation. Also, we look at the Portland situation, where they've coexisted so well for years, and as one firefighter from Portland said to me, we've had a divorce imposed upon our family when we actually didn't have any problems in the marriage. And that's them referring to the fact that their volunteers and their paid staff are working so well together, and we're actually getting the right results despite the lies that have, the twisted statistics that are being put out. At the moment, they've actually had a great record of their fire responses and outcomes, and they're all very offended. You know, think about if they're serious about fire reform over the other side, as they talk about, why am I having people like the Bulwarra team coming and telling me that they don't even have power in their fire station? They have to back the truck in when they come back from a fire if it's dark, with their mobile phone with a torch on it. That's how they back their fire truck in. Their fire truck, which is ancient. And you talk about reform, then let's start with infrastructure, let's start with respect. Let's make sure that the volunteers who do so much in our community in South West Coast and every other regional part of this state who are feeling so disrespected, let's return that respect back to them. Let's show them how valued they really are. Let's make sure they have a place in the Emergency Management Legislation Amendment Bill by being identified as having a seat at the table and being valued as volunteers right throughout the state of Victoria.